he's already talked to Dr. Binder and Dean about it. And he said, yeah, just give me the paperwork.
Sweet.
Not that I didn't.
I think Monday, next Monday, we won't have class.
Okay.
Okay, so that's good, 'cause it's Thanksgiving week,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Then Wednesday, we don't have, there's no
Class, yeah.
school, so.
Okay.
Well, let's see if we wait here a couple more minutes, see if we get a few more people.
I know Sarah said she wasn't coming today.
Yeah, I'd seen her yesterday. Nick said he'd be a little late. I got I think they're video, is that right? Okay, yeah.
Learn more that I would put all the topics and actually offer under it, and then put, here's what makes the full text.
Mine's literally the rush, my topic, my policy is not rush time. Just like, same thing, the bulleted temp and so.
Well, I guess we might as well get started. Not sure how many, I know a couple people can't make it today, and some are gonna be late. The instruction commentary and video due today. Of course, if you need more time, just let me know. Okay?
Did you just want that email to you?
You can email it, yeah.
Okay, well, that's not hard copy.
I'm sorry?
I emailed you the video, but I also have a hard copy.
Yeah, I mean, that's really good, because that does help. Thank you.
For the video, do we need to pass out those permission forms? And if they, isn't it like if they sign it, then you can't show them?
Correct.
Okay,
So they do need to pass them out and give them the opportunity to,
Okay.
take them home and their parents say, we want them in the video. Okay? The assessment commentary, that's due next Monday. Again, you can email that to me. We're gonna talk about that today. And then the professional portfolio, that's what we're gonna talk about again today too. And we'll start with that, unless you have any questions for me. Okay, just handed you out. This front sheet is what's on Blackboard. Okay, so if you go to our Blackboard site, it has all the right site. Alright, so basically what I handed out is this right here, where it says professional portfolio.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so that's that front sheet right here, it's this information right here. Okay, now, you want to keep this kind of simple. What you're doing is basically you're getting kind of the format for your portfolio. That's what you're doing here. So you're getting 7 cover pages and 6 artifacts. Okay? Let's take a look here, what one might look like. I'm having this done in my Intro to Adolescence class. So those of you, I just started doing that this semester. You're welcome. So basically what I'm going to look for on, when is that, Tuesday, December 10th, when this is due, that's our finals day, it's just some kind of folder. Basically going to have some kind of folder. I'm not even looking for a cover page like this here, because all I'm looking for are these 7 pages and 6 artifacts. Now, you can put in a cover sheet, you can put in a table of contents, eventually you're going to want to do that for your professional portfolio. But for me, what I'm looking for, and again, a teaching philosophy, you could put in there eventually, but for me, I'm just looking for these standards, each of the 7 standards printed out like this here. So I've given you, if you look at the next page, an example what one might look like. Okay? Okay, so the one you have there, that one also is online. The one you have there, I'm just going to show you that here. That's what you're looking at right now. So this is for standard 4. This is just an example of how you might put your cover sheets together. All right. So if we go back here, if you click on this BW Ohio Standards for the Teaching Profession, this is how I want you to organize your portfolio. Now, if you've already put together a portfolio, if you've already been working on something, or you have another way you'd like to put it together, that's fine, you can do that too. I don't want you to create another portfolio for me. Okay, so if you've already been working on something, you know, which is terrific, and you have a different format, that's fine. I just need to see that on December 10th. Okay?
And then hang on to it, because that's one of the formats you can use for your capstone.
Yeah, so this one here, so basically, the profession understands the Ohio Standards for the Teaching Profession. They understand this organization. That's why I'm having you, if you don't have a portfolio, create one like this. So when you go to interview principals and interview teams, they understand this organization, so they'll understand your portfolio better. They'll be able to find things in there better. Okay? So if you have your own way of putting things together, that's okay for me, but it may not be the best for your interview.
Yeah. What a lot of our students are doing is they're putting an opening section with their license and other things, and then they go into the stand, so they do students' content, assessment, and they put sample lesson plans. Like if you had a really great assessment, you did a lesson plan and things like that. And then at the end, they put any additional documentation, like their TPA stuff and things like that. So, but this is one of the formats that you can use in clinical practice and capstone.
Okay? So again, for me, it's just real simple. So it's going to be, put this up here, 7 of these pages. This is number 4. Each page coincides with, each cover page coincides with one of the standards here. Okay? So if you look at that page 4, which I handed out there, here in red, if I can get this a little bit bigger here. Okay, you see, all I did is I just took the words from here, put it on that page, and then I put 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4. Do you see that? Okay, so I just took it, just wrote it straight, put it right in there. In addition to that, in this example one, I have 2 sections below it. Overview of what this section is, this standard 4. I'm just giving the reader an idea of what they're finding in this section. Okay? So in this mythical section here, I provide much evidence for how I plan and deliver effective instruction that advances the learning of each individual student. You will find the following items, and then I just start listing my items. Okay? So it kind of gives them an idea of what's in there. Now, where did I get this information from, this verbiage, this written part? In this section of my portfolio, I provide much evidence for how I plan and deliver effective instruction. If you go right here to the standard itself, teachers plan and deliver effective instruction that advances. I'm just taking those words, just taking them down there and saying, this is the section, here's what I'm providing that meets this, okay?
And a
So
good
nothing
example of that
fancy.
is if you go through that section, you'll find out differentiated instructions in there, technologies in there. So it's
Yeah.
really easy, we call them artifacts, it's really easy. What you're looking for then is an artifact that shows your use of technology that you could tell a story about, or your use of differentiated instruction, again, that you could tell a story about.
Yeah, so you're just organizing it. So I just have what's in the section. You can do this however you want. This is just my recommendation. But what's in the section? So in your case, I'm expecting 1 item or no items.
Yes.
Okay, right now, because you're only giving me 1 item for 6 of these. Okay, make sense?
Don't stress out about this. What you're doing is you're setting up the framework that you then can put things into in the spring or next fall.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I call it setting up the framework of it. So you've got it all organized. It's just a matter of over the next few months, you will be selecting things to slide in.
Okay, and you can be taking things that you've already done in the past, like your community scan, for example, that you did in 211D, things that you're doing currently as well, you can start putting in here. Now, you don't want to put too much in there, but we'll talk about more about that next semester when you're doing your student teaching. Now, notice what I do here is once I go through this overview of the section, just telling them what's in the section, then I'm going to go through each of those point by point and tell them why it's in the section. So if you look here, I have a lesson plan teaching photosynthesis. I just have it listed up here. Then down here I say discussion of this evidence up here. There's the artifact, photosynthesis lesson plan dated October 12, 2019. And now I'm telling them, well, why is it in here? I taught a lesson on photosynthesis, which aligned with my school's content standards 4.1. Okay, and I look up here at 4.1, teachers align their instructional goals with school district priorities and Ohio's content standards. See, that's why it's in there. Okay, so I'm making it very clear. I'm just going through and listing 4.1, 4.2, all the areas that it's in there, and so they get an idea, okay, this is what I'm going to look for in this. This is what it's evidence of, okay? All right, so you have 7 of these sheets and 6 items to go in whichever 6 that you like. Okay, 1 item in each one. Does that make sense? I know it's kind of hard to say. 1 item per one, but you only need 6 total items. Yeah.
So they don't have to be like lesson plans, you can put something else in there?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, anything, and it could be something that's out external to BW. It could be something where you coached, any kind of thing that you did like with adolescents, where you were teaching them, like maybe an extracurricular activity or a summer camp or anything like that. Okay, any place that you worked that dealt with any kind of teaching. That means any of these standards here. Okay, yeah.
So it's, when we go through and do at least for like the framework, when we go through, it's 1 artifact per like 4, not 1 artifact per 4.1, 4.2.
Correct. So you have a grand total of 6 items, and those 6 items will be behind 6 different pieces of paper. Okay, so there'll be a 7th page that has nothing in it, unless you want to add something to that, but that's the minimum. So what I'm going to have you do is on December 10th come in, and you're just going to have it in a folder like this here, and you're just going to show it to me. You're going to take it with you, because I don't want to keep it, because I want you guys to take it with you. So I'm just going to take a look at it. I'm just going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's the 7 cover sheets. There's the 6 artifacts.
And you don't
and
care
that's
which
it.
standards they come from? They can come from any of the 7 standards?
Well, yeah, but they're going to cover 6 standards, because 1 item goes with 1 standard.
Yeah, right.
And then once you have that standard's covered,
Okay.
and you have to have 6 of these 7 standards with something in them.
With at least one thing.
With at least one thing in them.
Okay.
I know it's hard for me to say it. Where's our English people? They should be able to help me out with how to say something like that. Does that make sense? And again, if you come in, let's just pretend that you came in and you had the 7 cover pages and you put 6 things under 1. I'm not going to get upset about that. Okay? So, I'm just not going to hold, let's face it, you did what I really want you to do, and that is you've got the framework ready. Okay?
What time is our fire really?
It's 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock, okay.
Yeah.
And if you want to actually get the notebook you would use for capstone, that would be a nice 1-inch binder with a cover sleeve so you can put in your name and presentation portfolio or something like that. All of our students use the sleeves that they can slide it, the plastic sleeves you can slide it into. And if you're going to do the standards, then you'll need the tabs as well. So you'll need 7 tabs for each of those, but you're going to have an intro section. You're probably going to have a miscellaneous section. So you may want to get like a 5x or something like that of tabs.
Yeah, it's something about an inch thick, because you just have to think about how you're going to fill this. Right now, you're just filling it for me, but next semester, when you're actually doing your student teaching and you're getting this thing really ready, you really want to be choosy about what you pick. You don't want to overwhelm them with just like 7 lesson plans into one section.
Yeah.
If it's all doing the same thing, it's Ohio Learning Standards. See, I did it in this lesson plan. Ohio Learning Standards is this lesson plan. Just it's going to be too much.
And what I tell our seniors is, don't put it in there unless you have a story that goes with it. You have a story of the reason why it's there.
Yeah, and so you have, if you do this discussion of evidence, down here, you're starting to get into that story. Okay? All right, now, let's take a look at, unless there's other questions about this. Okay, I want to go back now, let's talk about NTPA, the assessment commentary, basically, again, an overview of everything. You did a context for learning, which is telling the person that's going to score this, what the classroom's like, who's in it, what the course actually is, so you've already done that, okay? The second thing you did was you made a learning segment, like a mini unit, you might think of it, and you discussed how you designed it. That was a planning commentary. That's showing again, the person that's scoring it is saying, I'm not just putting lessons together, I am putting them together based upon research, what I've learned at BW. Okay? And that's what they want to hear. That's why the planning commentary is so important. The instruction commentary and video, you've just done that, so now what happened when you taught this? That's what that was all about. So now you taught it, and you're telling them, here's what happened, here's some video showing you, when I tell you this is what happened, here's some video showing you that this is happening. Okay? So you can evaluate my teachings. This is all about creating teaching, evaluating the teaching, and now assessment commentary. Okay, so what you're going to do here is you're going to present and discuss evidence of learning. So now you're getting the results from the students. Okay, up here was just your instruction. Okay, now this is saying, oh, I've had time to look at whatever artifacts I have on student learning, and I had time to analyze it. Okay, which is very different because in the past, before EdTPA, and even like maybe 20, 30 years ago, even though schools of education would promote this, a lot of teachers just would get whatever the artifact is, like a test or a quiz, they would just grade it, and then they would just hand it back, and they'd have their grade. They wouldn't look at it, they wouldn't analyze that information to see how they could improve their teaching, where the students were weak, where they were strong. And that's really a big, big part of education. This is as much an assessment of you as it is of the students. Okay? Because how they're learning, what they're not learning is pointing right at you saying, this is what I've got to do better next time. Why did this happen? Why did 2/3 of them get this question wrong? Is it the way I wrote the question? Is it the way I presented the material? Was it the tasks I gave them? Okay, what went wrong? Why would so many of these students get this wrong? That kind of analysis doesn't happen a lot in schools. Okay? But that's what the expectation is here with NTPA and for your resident educator, what is that, RESA?
Yeah, and SLOs as well, the student learning objectives, and
Okay.
the process is the same.
So you're going to look at this evidence, you're going to analyze data, and then you're also going to say what you're going to do next based upon all of this. So you've gone through this whole thing here, this whole unit, you've looked at your own teaching, you've looked at what the students have learned, what they haven't learned, what they're struggling with, and they want to hear what you're struggling with, what the students are struggling with, and then what you're going to do based upon the evidence. So it's not just, oh, I'm going to go on to the next thing, but I'm going to go on to this because the students are ready for this based upon this evidence, but maybe I have to go back and do this because based on the evidence, they need this and blah, blah, blah. Okay? All right, so the assessment commentary. Let's have, you're welcome. English, correct. And this is again online. I'll pull it up there. Extra. So now we're into all these under course documents. I'm getting it from assessment commentary, whether it's math or social studies. So we pull up one of these. I think I already have one pulled up. Okay, so here's an assessment commentary. I think it's for history, social studies. Okay. So now, in red are just the things I've added in there. So again, what I'm looking for, 1 or 2 sentences in each of these, that's it. Okay, so let's kind of take a look at this. Analyzing student learning, the first one, identify the specific learning objectives measured by the assessment you chose for analysis. Now, this should be all your learning objectives from all the learning, the lesson plans. Okay, because that's what this whole thing was about, okay? So you're saying lesson number 1, these are the learning objectives, lesson number 2, these are the learning objectives. I'm just gonna take them and cut them and put them right in there. Okay, because that's what the assessment should be about. That's what you said they were learning. If that's what they're learning, how do you know without assessing it? Okay, summative assessment. Okay, the second one says summary of data that shows learning from the learning segment. Okay, in other words, now we're going to summarize what that learning is. So let's take a look at what we have there. Okay, I guess I've got something I'm going to hand out here in a second. And then discuss learning evidence from 3 work samples in the whole class. So for me, you're just going to take 3 work samples, whatever the students are doing, there might be the tests, okay, whatever this assessment is. And what NTPA wants to see is that you aren't just looking at the class as a whole, okay? So it's not just the whole class you're looking at, but you're also looking at individual students. And so now you're showing them, here's how I look at individual students as well as the class. So you aren't looking at the class, just the class average and saying, oh, the class got an average of 87%, that's really good, I did a really good job. They want you to start going into the data and saying, oh, this student here only got a 48%. What went wrong there? Let me look at this student's sample, okay? Now for me, you aren't going to a lot of depth, but here you're just going to just say like a sentence or 2 about the different work samples, and that's going to be fine. Because you're getting, all you're doing is you're showing me that you know what goes in there. Okay? So how might this come about? Well, first let me look at this. The second part that you have there is, if I can take a look here, beside the commentary itself, which you see up there, I went into the assessment task 3, assessing student learning, what you need to think about. This is for the official NTPA, it's not for me. Okay, but if you want an idea from what it is I'm going to be doing when I do my student teaching, when I do my NTPA, these are the things I need to think about. And then I believe I put the scoring rubrics there. Yeah, so the 5 scoring rubrics. Thanks. Okay, so again, they have a rubric for everything. Okay, so remember you had 5 rubrics, if you remember, for the planning commentary, 5 different things they were looking at for the planning commentary, and you used one of those in here. I gave you somebody's planning commentary, I believe, and then you used one of the rubrics in here. You also did that with the instruction commentary. There's 5 that go with that too. Okay, and now there's 5 that go with the assessment commentary. 5 different attributes they're looking, different characteristics they're looking for in your assessment. And they're always telling you where they're getting the information from. So if you look at those, come in here to the scoring rubric for all tasks, we'll look at math. I think I gave you number 11, assessment rubric 11, I gave everybody that one. Okay, so if I want to answer those questions, if I want to answer these questions here, okay, I want to look at how they're going to score those questions. And they're telling you right here, here's how I'm scoring them. Okay, so assessment rubric number 11, which you have there, I gave you a copy of that rubric. Okay, where are they getting the information from? The primary sources of evidence. When they go through rubric 11, they are looking at prompt 1, question 1, in the assessment commentary. Looking at this one right here, the one we just were looking at, okay? They're looking at student work samples, which we just talked about, and then how you're evaluating everything. So they're telling you evaluation criteria, here's what we mean by that. They give you the definition. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what they're doing. They're telling you, here's what we're looking for. So if you don't look at this and you write this assessment commentary up without looking at that, you may miss the very things that they're looking for. And it'd be unfortunate because you might have done everything, and you might know what that was, but you just didn't know, oh, that's what they meant when they asked for this here or this here. Okay, so that's how you use those rubrics again. The rubrics, and then this information here that's in the handbook. Okay? Does that sort of make sense? It's kind of the same thing we've been talking about before, but it's just very.
Just a reminder, you'll be receiving, unfortunately, 3 sets of rubrics. You'll have the rubric that's in the handbook, you'll have a rubric that's more detailed, that's a separate handout for your license area, and then you'll have a summary of that. So you have all these tools that you can use to write your responses.
Okay, so with these rubrics, they're telling you, in other words, they're giving you kind of a very, very strong way to go about planning for how you're going to write. Okay, so let's say, again, since I'm math, that's what I'm going to look at here. So I'm getting ready to write my assessment commentary, and I'm going to, especially those first, the questions that I was just showing you, that were written out in red, okay? How am I gonna go out and make this, how am I gonna show this evidence, okay? So, if you recall last time we talked, I was talking about this 5th grade class, I was teaching fractions too, do you remember that? I was talking about teaching fractions, and I was using the Ohio Standard. So, we have this mythical class, we have lesson plan 1 learning objectives, lesson plan 2 learning objectives, and lesson plan 3 the learning objectives. These are all the things that I'm going to have in my summative assessment. I'm going to target all these things because I've got to show them that if I wanted them to learn this, I better have data showing that they learned it, which is my summative assessment. Okay, so I can't just do one of these and say, well, I didn't really take any data on this and data on this, because they're going to say, well, then how do you know they learned this and this? You can't say, well, I just know it. Make sense? Okay, so those 3 things there were, those 3 learning objectives are right, I put them right here. Okay? So these 3 things are going there. 2 other things you need to think about. Here's the Ohio Learning Standard, which obviously I made my learning objectives based upon this. Okay, so when I wrote those 3 learning objectives, they were including this language, these ideas here, because this is what was applying to all 3 of those. I could have 2 learning standards, I could have 3 learning standards. Okay, in my case, I just had 1. Okay? Now they're going to talk about subject-specific expression. Is that right, expressions? I didn't think that was the right term.
It's called subject-specific emphasis.
That's it,
That's their
emphasis.
term, yeah.
Subject-specific emphasis, and so in math, it's conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and mathematical.
Those are the bullet points, all the way back to task 1, you had to look at these bullet points, and you had to include that theme in your overall learning segment.
Okay, so where would you find them? Well, right now, they are these areas in 1C. So when I handed out this assessment commentary, you all have 1C. You won't have the same ones as I have unless you're math. Okay, but these are the things they want you to bring into the discussion when you're answering this question. Okay, so you're talking about your learning objectives when you're answering this question. You're also talking in terms of these 3 things here. Now, this is what is, I think it's kind of like, it's coming together for you as we start talking about this, because this is a very complex thing. All right, and that's why we're doing it here prior to you actually doing the real thing. Okay, because it is very much developmental. You learn a little bit, And at this point, this may be the point where you're saying, oh my gosh, I wish I would have gone back and I wish I would have done this a little bit differently. I wish I would have planned this differently. Because now that after we talk today, you're gonna say, oh, I didn't realize that I'm gonna have to do this at the end, but I didn't do this up here to do this here. In other words, this depends on this. And now you're coming down here and saying, oh my God, I didn't know I had to have all those things in there. Now it's dawning on me. I can talk about, in this history, facts and concepts, inquiry, interpretation, or analysis skills, and so on. Oh, I didn't do that. I wish I would have done that. Okay? So that's why we're doing this through here. So what I want to do is I want to have my summative assessment, whether it's a test or whatever it is, about these learning objectives there and these ideas here. What do you call them? You call them emphasis. That's it. Subject-specific emphasis. That's in your 1C. Yes?
So when you go through and do like the real ed TPA, do you have to have everything based on the one lesson that's being shown in your video? Or
No.
is it, okay.
But the learning segment, just the,
Okay, so as
all
long
of
as it's half, so it's like the learning segment video is
Yeah.
like 10 minutes of the one.
Yeah, your videos are just snips, and they're more snips that allow you to answer the prompts in task 2 and task 3 than they are really of the entire learning segment.
Okay.
That's the tragedy of you only being able to submit 20 minutes, is you can't show everything.
Yeah.
And you're forced to show evidence of feedback, evidence of rapport. So the video clips you choose to actually submit will be targeted towards specific questions. One thing that I wanted to point out that I want you all just to think about right now, because you made a great point about sometimes you get to task 3 and say, boy, I wish back in task 1 I would have done that a little differently. There's no reason why you can't go back and edit task 1. Even if you've uploaded it, you can get it back and edit it. But I want every one of you to think right now about writing a learning objective, sort of the overarching learning target. What has to be included in that statement? Think about this. Where are you going to get the words for that statement, that learning target, that learning objective, or 2 or 3 or whatever There's actually 4 sources. And this is the one that, if you recognize that, it's going to save you a lot of time. You must use some of the ODE language. You're taking a standard from the ODE, content standards, from the learning standards. So you've got to include that in your statement. You have to include your language function verb. That ring a bell to any of you? Do you remember what I'm talking about? There was a box of language function verbs and you had to pick one. So you're evaluating something, or there was a box with 6 to 8 words probably, and you have to be sure that that language function verb shows up in your objective.
is that in the planning commentary?
Yeah.
There
Right
it
there
is.
it is. There it is. All of you have a box like that you have to pick one of those words,
These words in here.
okay?
So you're using those words.
So you got OD
You'll allow
language merged with one of
language.
those words, merged with your subject specific emphasis bullet points. You've got to incorporate those into your learning objectives because they have to be measured
Those are these.
under common assessment. All of you have 2 or 3 bullets like that. You have to include those words. And then the 4th part is you have to include some reference to best practices. What am I going to do? Am I summarizing something? Am I using a graph? You have to have some word that talks about a best practice. So you're stealing students being able to apply this information to do something. And then you'll be able to cite Bloom 3, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got all these things going on before you actually finish your official learning objective. And if you do it well in task 1, all you're doing here in 1A is writing what you already said.
Okay.
But if your common assessment doesn't measure, for example, the subject-specific emphasis points, it's going to be hard to write 1C.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that here in a
Yeah,
second.
no, you have a good example of that,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Do we have to get student permission, so I'm like looking at 1C now, do we have to get student permission to use their work for a TPA?
No, not the written word.
Not their written work.
You have to, like, just take
You take the names off.
Okay.
And many school districts have a blanket policy about the use of videos for academic purposes. So a lot of our students don't even need to use. There is a form that you can send home, but a lot of our students, you check with your teacher first, and they'll let you know whether that's necessary or not.
Okay.
Because EdTPA would not release the videos to the public either, so.
Okay, so now we've got this here at 1C, and that's what I'm kind of looking at right now is 1C with the handout I just gave you. Okay? So at this point, I'm looking back and I'm saying, okay, did I do everything that Professor Vail just said? Did I use all of these ideas? Did I use the subject specific, that's emphasis, I put expressions up there. Emphasis, did I use those words with my Ohio standard, with the language functions, when I created my objectives? And then what was the fourth one that you had said?
Well, they also need to be sure that they somehow reference or make,
Oh, best
allow you to
practice.
reference best practices. Now, you can add additional Bloom verbs to the language function verbs. So there can be additional verbs, because it's always nice to show that I'm at Bloom 3 or 4 or 5 and things like that. But you have to at least use the language function verb somehow in your learning objectives,
Okay.
because you're
So-
required to do that.
So for me to have said that back in September, it would have been too
Wouldn't have
much.
made any sense.
Okay, but now you've done a lot of this stuff, and you've worked with these terms, and okay, yeah, so you didn't write those learning objectives exactly the best way, okay? But that's why we're going through this like this. But you had to write something first, go through the motions and do this, and now it's like, oh, now I'm starting to see things a little clearer, because it's that complex. Okay, there was no way to figure it out ahead of time. So if I'm using all of those in here, if you look, and I wish I would have, I thought I had reprinted this, but I guess I didn't. I meant to reprint this because I had updated it. I
Do you want me to
started.
go make a copy? Do you have a master? I could go make a copy.
I've got one over there or not. I can't remember if I printed it because I got busy with something.
Okay.
I thought I did, and I probably ended up throwing away the new ones and kept the old ones. That's what I think I might have done. Yeah, I wish I'd have had, I'll send it to you. What I did is I bolded like the SSEs. Where are we at here? Like in my example, I used conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and mathematical reasoning, and I bolded them in here to kind of show you. Actually, I do see them bolded, so maybe I do have the actual one in there. Just it's hard for me to see it up here. There's concepts. That's conceptual understanding. Maybe I do have this in here. There's mathematical reasoning, procedure. So you see how I'm peppering these with those terms. Maybe I did do this. Maybe I did throw away the right one. Okay. All right, so that's me going back. So when you think about in spring or whenever you do your student teaching, you think about, I'm going to write my learning objectives, and then I'm going to start bringing in these ideas that we just talked about. Okay? So I'm going to bring in these SSEs. I'm going to make sure that they're attached to the Ohio Learning Standard, which I think you can do that pretty well right now. I think you're able to do that pretty well. I'm going to bring in these ideas. I'm going to bring in the ideas of the language functions. I'm going to start bringing those in. And then I'm going to think about best practices. You see, it's very constructive. It's going to be a back and forth. It's not going to be just sitting down and writing these learning objectives and just saying, okay, I got that done. Let's go on to the next part of my lesson. It's going to be, I wrote a draft down. Now I'm going to consider this because it's very complex to do all four things at once. Okay? So what I did with mine was I wrote the learning objective first based upon the Ohio Learning Standard. And then I went back and I started looking at these. I said, okay, let me translate some of the words I have there using these words. Okay?
And those don't have to be in every objective. You don't have to have all three of those in every objective. Just they have to be in there somewhere.
All right? And then the same thing, which I hadn't gotten to yet with this, but the language function, I'm going to now go back to that, like analyze, and you saw the language functions in those boxes up here. And now I'd say, okay, where can I put those in my learning objective? And then finally, I'd look for some best practices. So this will end up in a graphic organizer. Students will do blah, 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 blah. with it, and show it in a graphic organizer or something like
Students will
that.
apply this by doing this, students will, yeah.
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 That make sense? A lot of work for this part here, and I don't think I could have explained this, I mean, I have a hard time
It'll
explaining
be the
it right
most,
now.
it'll
let
be the,
alone
yeah, it'll be the most detailed lesson of objectives you ever write, but you will save yourself big headaches if you put the time into it at the beginning. And remember that your lesson objectives must be assessed in your common assessment at the end.
Okay,
They've got to match up.
all right, so let's take a look at this here once again. Okay, now what they want you to do is they want to go around these SSEs, okay, which you all have there. They want you to look at your data, your evidence, in other words, your summative assessment based upon these ideas here. Now, this is social studies. Mine, I have theirs in math that you have there, so you have conceptual understanding. So if I have these already embedded in my learning objectives, well now, it's easier for me to pull those out of my data. Okay, so here's what I did. Here was my plan. Okay, so I get my learning objectives. I know what I want the students to learn. I'm working on a pre-assessment, which isn't necessary, but it's very, very helpful, and you'll see why in a second. And my summative assessment, I'm already working on that right up from the start, because when I work on a summative assessment, in other words, this is what the students are going to have to prove to me that they've learned. Sometimes I go back and I change my learning objective. So it's like, oh, I have them learning this here, and there's nowhere in my learning objective do I even talk about this. Because when I make my summative assessment, sometimes it clarifies what my goals are. I don't even know exactly what they are sometimes. I think, oh, it's this general thing, and then I come down there and well, I'm not talking, nowhere do I teach equivalent fractions, for example. Let's say my goal in this was to teach how to add fractions with unlike denominators, which requires equivalent fractions. But I'm thinking adding unlike denominators, and I put a learning objective for that. And then down here, I'm saying, well, if I'm testing this, it's got to be a learning objective, equivalent fractions. And I go back and I either add something or I change something in my learning objective. You see how it's just kind of going back and forth all the time. All right? So, my summative assessment, I would probably do before my pre-assessment. So here I'm going to assess them to find an equivalent fraction. And what else do I have on back there? There we are. Can you make a drawing of an equivalent fraction? Can you complete these problems that require to use an equivalent fraction? And why do we use equivalent fractions when adding fractions? So there's my summative assessment. So I'm looking at this here, I'm saying, do I have all these objectives in my learning objectives? Okay, because that's what I'm testing. Make sense? So far, so good? All right, now what's very helpful for me, because I'm trying to show at TPA what a good teacher I am. In other words, how effective I am. And the best way to show it is to show growth in my students, the learning in my students. That's the best way to show it. Okay, well, how do I show it? Do I just have the summative assessment and say, look, everybody got a 90% on this, look, I'm a great teacher? Okay, well, you can do that. I mean, they will accept that type of thing. But think about what you're trying to accomplish. You're trying to show the effect you had on your students, your lesson. So if I did a learning segment in here, for example, with simple addition, 3 plus 4, I gave you a whole bunch of those problems. And I grade them. I said, look, everybody got 100%. What a great teacher I am. Does anybody here really think I'm a great teacher in addition? Or was it something you already knew prior to coming into my class? Right? So I'm not getting, it's like, okay, I'm showing that everybody got 100%, I'm a great teacher, but really they're going to say, wait a minute, these are adults. They already knew that before they came to you, Dr. Christie. How do we know that you had any effect on them at all? So what I would do prior is, I would give you a pre-assessment on those same types of questions. Okay? Now, if you don't do very well on those, and you do really well on these, what was in between this and this? My learning segment. That's the reason they're doing so well. So if I give you a pre-assessment on simple addition and you got a 40%, everybody's getting 40, 50%, then I give you a lesson and then you're all getting 90s, 100%, I can say that's because of me and my learning segment. I must have been very effective. So that's what helps by having a pre-assessment. Okay, so what I did here in this mythical class, I gave this pre-assessment, and then I went through the learning segment, and then I gave them this final test. I collected all the data, and I'm going to organize it in a way that shows, here's the results, here's the conceptual understanding, and I kind of wish I had this on an electronic file. Oh, there we are, right there. Okay, so remember those subject-specific emphasis words. One was conceptual understanding, one was procedural fluency, one was math reasoning. And I said on my pre-assessment, questions 3 and 7 are dealing with that. On the summative assessment, 4, 5, 6, and 10 are dealing with that. Okay, so I'm going to see conceptual understanding. I'm going to take the data from here, look at what they knew prior to my lesson in conceptual understanding, and then after my lesson, I'm going to compare those two, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm saying, okay, for those questions here, on the pre-assessment, here are their scores. You see the class average is 7.7%. Okay? After my lesson, here's the summative assessment. It goes up to 75.8%. They learned a lot. That was me. Okay? Now I can prove it was me. If I don't have this here, I've got to, it's going to take me a little bit more energy to try and figure out, well, that was me. And they're, well, how do you know it was you? Well, I just know it. It's tougher to say it. Make sense? So by having my learning objectives tied to these SSEs, then I can identify the questions based on the SSEs, organize them, and tally them that way. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm just organizing the questions based on those, tallying them, and then taking averages and saying, okay, based on this is the before, this is the after. And now I have a lot of information I can start talking about where I did really well, where I didn't do so well. Like I come down here and I'm looking at the summative assessment, and you can see like, oh, by the way, these are by students. Student number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have all the students there that have the class average down here. So remember, they wanted you to look at individual student work, and they wanted you to look at the class, the whole class. It's right here. That's the way I've organized it. Okay? Now, remember you have focus students too, and we aren't going to do a lot with focus students right now, but you're familiar with that. There are 2 or 3 students that you're focusing on, and that's what they want the student work samples for. And you can see I just marked them there with a hashtag. So I'm going to be talking about them individually, not for me, but for EdTPA.
You have to upload their work samples, you have to talk a little bit about what you would do next for them, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the 3 students you identified somewhere along the line. One of them having to have an IEP or 504 plan. Typically what that chart on the left-hand side would be your students 1, 2, and 3 would be your 3 focus students, and then students 4 through how many you have. But your ability to categorize your questions by matching it to the subject-specific emphasis makes this chart much easier to create.
This is an example from, there's 2 examples from actual EdTPAs. So I think now, I think most students at this point here start to really put this whole thing together. But I don't think we could have in September. Okay, and I think now, and again, for me, you might go through, you might say, well, you know, I don't even have the assessment. I did that learning segment 3 weeks ago, and I wish I would have kept the tests, and I didn't keep them. Well, for me, just get any test and you just go ahead and, or whatever assessment you want and use it. Okay, I'm not gonna go back and say, oh, does this match the learning segment? But this is the place to make those mistakes. Okay? This is the place not to have written a really good learning objective. All right, so you're just gonna grab a summative assessment, you're gonna say, okay, here's my thing, here's 3 work samples, we did this just the other day, even though my learning segment was a month ago. And and that's fine with me, because all you're doing is you're showing me that, yeah, this is where, and of course you're gonna have to kind of, let's face it, you're gonna have to kind of blur things, because when you say focus student number 1, and it might even be a different class that you're using for this. Remember, all this has to be the same class, but for me, you might, to get through this, you might say, well, I'm in a different class that I'm taking these summative assessment for, these work samples from, and so your focus student that you were talking about way back here was in government, and now you're using American history down here. But that's for me. Everything would be one class for NTPA, okay? Any questions about that? Any questions about any of this part?
Remember, when you do this for your 3 focus students, once you decide for sure who they are, you'll have to submit evidence of learning and evidence of feedback. So, for example, on the common assessment, you would want to be sure to write feedback, specific feedback to those, particularly those 3 students, because then you could submit that as evidence of feedback that you gave them.
Yeah, so as you're going through this, again, you still have some things to consider that Professor Vale's talked about. But as you go through this, you're going to also get some aha things. You're going to say, like here, it's saying, feedback to guide further learning. It's written directly on work samples or in separate documents or in audio files. What's going to be your evidence? And you could say, oh my gosh, I already handed back everything, and I put nothing but a score on there. I said, you got an 8 out of 10, okay? But as you're going through this again, as you're going through this, you're saying, uh-oh, next time when I actually do this, I better have some good feedback that I'm writing to them, explaining, what's wrong, why, and where, things like that. Because I'm going to upload that document to NTPA. And if I don't have that information written down there, I'm not going to be able to say I had this great feedback.
In addition to that, you'll delete the second one because we don't use audio files, but you can use any of your submitted video clips from task 2 or task 3 as evidence of feedback. So one of the things you might want to plan in task 2 is asking open-ended questions and being sure to give kids feedback, because you might be able to cite that as evidence of your ability to give feedback, in addition to the things you might write on this common assessment.
Yeah, so you might have, remember, you might have like focus student 2, and the right, again, placing that camera is very important. And you can use more than one video camera, correct?
Yes, you can.
So you could be thinking, okay, I want to capture, especially my focus students, I want to make sure they're on video, so maybe I'm going to have 2 or 3 cameras, if I can, just depending. But now, we're talking about feedback here, so it's like, okay, so I'll be talking to one of my focus students, and I'm going to be giving them feedback. Well, that's very good. How did you get that? What would you do next? And so, great, I captured that on video. Now that's going to be part of what I'm going to submit to NTPA, and now I'm going to use it in this part as well as in the prior part in the instruction commentary.
Everyone starts the learning segment with an idea of who the 3 focus students are going to be. But I will tell you, there's probably half of them, after they watch all the videos and everything, usually change at least one of them to a different kid. Because that's the kid that responded, that's the kid that used the academic language. So again, they don't know who your 3 kids are till you start writing about them in task 3. So you have a long time, you've already looked at all your videos and everything before you say, yep, here's my 3.
Okay, so here we have, so as you're answering this for me, evidence of language understanding and use, now it's like, okay, where are they using the language functions? Where are they using these terms? And you could say, nowhere. Geez, Dr. Christie, I don't have anything for you, because this is the stuff. But now it's like, but I gotta remember that for the TPA.
Yeah, you've got to ask a prompt that brings out their use of the academic language. Because you can submit a video as evidence, and the nice thing about the task 3 videos is they're not consecutive minutes. So you can take a little bit from each day. Anytime a kid used the word well, you can splice those all into one. You can combine those into one 5-minute video, 5 minutes or less, as your actual evidence. And they love it if you submit a video there. because they're actually seeing the kids use the words.
Yeah, so the student says, well, I was looking at this here, and you might say, well, what do we call that, looking at that there? What do you mean? Well, I was analyzing it, okay? Oh, I got that on video, now he's using the academic language, okay? Now, also think about this too, because, but we're at a point right now where you can really see the global, the widespread preparation that you're gonna need. So if I want them to use academic language, I'm not gonna tell them the day before the filming and the day before my learning segment, okay, now use analyze. You're gonna want to start setting that up from the very beginning of your semester or quarter. So in January, or even right now that you're in some of these classes you're going to use, you want to get them used to these terms and using these terms. Okay? So when they say, oh, I was looking through the stuff here, and you say, okay, what do we call that stuff? What do you mean? Well, it's called data. Okay, so you were looking, and when you say looking through, what do you mean? I was analyzing the data. See, I'm going to get them doing that in January, so in March when I'm filming this, they're used to saying analyzing the data. Does that make sense? So it's all this preparation coming into play. Getting them to talk. Okay, so again, it's going to be something where, yeah, my class is quiet. You know, it's always a 7 o'clock, 7:10 class. They're always real quiet. Maybe I don't want to use that class because they're always so quiet. But whatever class I'm going to use, I want them to be used to discussing and explaining things, because I know in March when I film this, or February, whenever I film this, I'm going to need them used to talking and comfortable talking and using academic language. Okay? If I'm using any kind of manipulatives, any kind of manipulatives, I'm talking even, you know, in social studies and language arts, because you do use different things there. I want them to use them correctly and appropriately. You can use the correct terms with them in that. All right? Does that help? Okay, any questions? Okay, then I think, let's see, our next meeting is what? Tuesday, December 10th, right? Do we meet again? I don't think we do. No, that's it. 9 to 10. So basically, I'm just going to get your feedback. I'm going to get the portfolios and give them right back to you. I'm just going to do like a lot of you maybe do when you're just grading the homework for your students. I'm just going to walk around. You're just going to flip through and tell me that portfolio's done. And
I will not be here, by the way. I'm going to be in Austria. My wife, my travel agent, has planned a trip for us, so we're going to be in Austria by then. But for many of you, of course, I'll see you in January. Yeah, wait.
given his background, he may not be able to get back in the country.
I don't know, we'll see. They gave me a passport.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. If you have any questions after, just come and see me.
Something turns off here.